Sælverði, ladies and gentlemen, the former president of Iceland, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, rector of the University of Iceland, Kristín Ingólfsdóttir, our dear guest, Linda Darling-Hammond. Dear guests, I bid you welcome to this opening of the anniversary month of the School of Education at the University of Iceland. To many of us, education is the most precious thing we can offer our children, offer ourselves, and offer our societies. Well, if it's a good education, if it is good, we think it is of immense value for the individual, for his or her personal development, for the well-being of our society, for our democracy, and for the development of our sustainable economy. But how do we ensure it is good education? How do we ensure it matches our wishes? How do we reform or reconstruct the education we developed for the 19th and the 20th century to fulfill expectations for the 21st century? We must look in many directions for the answers to these questions. To the analysis of educational policy, to the ideas about school reform, to the development of children and adolescents, to the principles for learning and teaching, to teacher education, and to the research on all these areas. And indeed, here we have with us Professor Linda Darling-Hammond, who has indeed attended to all these areas. She has had an incredibly full and dynamic career as a teacher, as a researcher, as a professor, previously at Columbia University, presently at Stanford University, as an advisor to a host of professional bodies and an active participant in those bodies. She has been executive director of the National Commission on Teaching and America's Future, and an advisor to political leaders, to the present administration and to President Obama. She is a prolific writer of scientific papers, of books. She is a scientist engaged with her society, something some of you know I have been advocating. But I think she is listened to very attentively from all directions because of three qualities that I think characterize her argumentation. The first is the profound understanding and respect for the pragmatics of the field she talks about, and the concurrent insistence to underpin her ideas and recommendations by research. Secondly, because of her educational vision, which is characterized in particular by equity and demands for very high standards in all the activities she focuses on. The title and content of her most recent book and well-argued book, The Flat Earth and Education, How America's Commitment to Equity Will Determine Our Future. It well demonstrates her emphasis on all these counts. And thirdly, because of her style of discourse, which does not allow simple dichotomies or polarization of debate, but insists on the development of substantive argument, wherever her basic values, vision, and evidence takes her. I'm very pleased to give the floor to Professor Linda Darling-Hammond.
So I want you to notice that I was supposed to send Cyan my PowerPoint at, I don't know what time that was because I'm in a different time zone. Microsoft sends your little reminders wherever you are. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I have greatly enjoyed my time in Iceland so far and expect to enjoy it still more tomorrow when I do some more touring. And I'm struck by how similar the issues and the conversation is here and in the United States and so many other countries around the world. But the great good sense that people here bring to the conversation is extraordinary, and I have already come to appreciate that. I am going to talk a little bit about this question of teaching and learning in the 21st century. Of course, we're already 10, 11 years into the 21st century, but there are a set of challenges that will stretch before us for quite a number of years that societies all over the world are figuring out how to deal with, and that will be our topic this afternoon. Now, one of the things that is true everywhere is that teaching is among the most complex professions, partly because students are not standardized, and the process of learning is always a little bit unpredictable, and teachers have the job not just of imparting information, but figuring out how to enact and enable learning, and that has its own special quality. So I try to remain apprised of and humble about that process of learning and teaching by collecting stories from teachers actually all over the world who describe what their students' paths to learning are. And this morning I'm going to trace very quickly the path of learning when students are engaged in learning the concept of metaphor. I'm an Old English teacher, and that's one of the things that we struggle with. And one of the things that you'll see here that is one of the great exciting features of being a teacher is that students do learn even when they start out with a very modest appreciation for the concept you're teaching. So this is one of the first efforts of a student trying to learn the concept of metaphor. He was as tall as a 6'3" tree. Not very creative, but the idea of a comparison is there. Here's a slightly more inventive approach. John and Mary had never met. They were like two hummingbirds who also had never met. You can see that there's a little learning occurring, but it does grow stronger. She walked into my office like a centipede with 98 missing legs. So students, they're struggling to get this concept. But with great teaching, it does begin to take hold. He was as lame as a duck, not the metaphorical lame duck either, but a real duck that was actually lame. Trying to avoid that little thing in the margin where the teacher writes cliche, right? And moving towards greater appreciation. Even in his last years, Grandpappy had a mind like a steel trap, only one that had been left out so long it had rusted shut. And now we see how with time, with teaching, with practice, students become more sophisticated in their understanding. This is a New York City student. He fell for her like his heart was a mob informant and she was the East River. And I don't know if you understand the significance of the East River, but that's where it is rumored there are many people buried in concrete. From a Canadian student, she grew on him like she was a colony of E. coli and he was room temperature Canadian beef. And let me assure you, if you're a high school teacher, you've seen how the mind of adolescence works. I have taken out the most gross and disgusting metaphors. But here we go into sort of a level of even greater sophistication. The plan was simple, like my brother-in-law Phil, but unlike Phil, this plan just might work. And finally, at the highest level, this is like Bloom's taxonomy for those of you who follow such things, when students capture both the concept and can use it with irony. Her vocabulary was as bad as like whatever. So the path of learning does occur. It's always unpredictable. It's always supported by great teaching. And teaching has always taken a certain kind of talent. But today, it calls for even greater skill and sophistication than before. We have a greater need for education in virtually all societies. There's more expectation of what schools will be able to produce. We have higher standards for learning being enacted in countries around the globe. And in most countries, we have more diverse students with a greater range of educational needs as immigration increases and is part of the common experience of schools virtually everywhere, including in Iceland. And there are these greater expectations that schools will not only get students to a basic or minimal level of understanding, reading and writing and arithmetic, but to be able to engage with the kinds of jobs and economic opportunities of today. And the double challenge for teachers of teaching for understanding on the one hand, teaching most students for a level of understanding that only a few had to reach previously, and teaching for diversity, teaching so that students with different language backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, experience levels can connect to that knowledge, poses these new demands. We have more complex tasks that students have to undertake. They will bring more diverse pathways to learning from their different experience levels and types of experience. And teachers, therefore, need to have deeper and more flexible content knowledge. They need to have more than one way of teaching the content and understanding the content so they can connect what they know to what students bring. It's that connection that allows the teaching and learning to occur. They have to be more sophisticated about scaffolding the learning process, about knowing that if a student understands something in this way, here are the steps that they need to undertake to reach the curriculum goals that we have for them. And that may need to be differentiated across multiple students. So there has to be a more diagnostic approach to understand what's needed and what strategies will work. More individualized supports for students, and more coherence in all the elements of education, because to be efficient and effective, we have to make sure that curriculum and assessment and professional development all come together in a way that makes sense and coheres. And of course, the changes in societies that are creating these pressures for school change have come about very rapidly. These are data from the United States, but it's not so much different in most industrialized countries. In 1900, when many school systems were really being developed, there were only about 5% of jobs that required specialized knowledge and skills. In 2000, that percentage was about 70%. And so that rapid change means that schools are trying to reinvent themselves to keep up with that different set of expectations. The goals are evolving. Schooling in the Middle Ages was really the school of the church. The goal there was really receiving the word, being told what was important to know and remember. Schooling in the industrial age was really about educating for discipline. And the goal was learning routines, being able to do what was designed for you over and over again. And today, education is really developing new goals, including especially the development of self-motivated and self-reliant citizens, people who can organize much of their own work, can reflect on and improve their own work because they've developed the capacity to evaluate and analyze their work and to reflect about how to improve it. Those who can use new technologies and knowledge to collaboratively design new products and solutions. The demand for skills is changing in ways that cause us to have a huge increase in most nations in non-routine interactive types of skills, non-routine analytic skills, a decline in the need for routine manual and cognitive skills. And the dilemma for schools is that the skills that are easiest to teach and test are also the ones that are easiest to digitize, automate, and outsource. And so that calls on us to think about these questions in a different way. And of course, knowledge is rapidly changing. This is just one example. When we lost the planet Pluto, I remember, I don't know if you do this in Icelandic, we had a little acronym for memorizing the names of the planets in order, and it had something to do with my my dear Aunt Sally or something like that. Anyway, when Pluto dropped off, we had to develop a whole new acronym for memorizing the list of planets. But more importantly, knowledge is changing and growing at a rapid point. Now, some of you know California a little bit, and you may know that Stanford is across the bay from the University of California at Berkeley, which is our arch rival. So I do not usually quote people from Berkeley, but this time I have to give them credit. There's an amazing study that several professors have been involved in there, and they are measuring the growth of knowledge in the world. And they found that between the year 1999 and 2003, a 4-year period, there was more new knowledge created in the world than in the entire history of the world preceding. Think about that for a moment. Technology knowledge at that time was doubling every 2 years. It's now doubling every year. So it's impossible simply to say, here are the facts that you need to have. Divide them up into the 12 years of schooling, or however many are the basic years of schooling. I think it's 10 years here before upper secondary school. And then make sure that students learn those facts, and then they're baked and done, and they can go out in the world. In fact, students are going to have to teach themselves most of what they're going to need to know throughout most of their careers, because the knowledge is going to continue to change and expand at a very rapid point. That's not to say they shouldn't learn a set of concepts and facts that are the underpinnings for understanding the disciplines in the fields. But in addition to that, they will have to have these highly developed skills for mastering, incorporating, finding, using, evaluating, critiquing new knowledge and new skills at a very rapid pace. So this set of expectations for learning are changing. This particular slide comes from Hong Kong. The deputy minister there, Chris Wardlaw, was advocating for reforms there, and his little presentation was at that time was called Mathematics in Hong Kong, China, Improving on Being First in Pisa. Gives you a sense of the competition that some jurisdictions feel around the race to the top, so to speak. But this list is very common. You've seen it here as well, that we expect now students to be able to do a set of things that we've long expected for some, but now expect for all. The ability to communicate, to adapt to change, work in teams, solve problems, analyze, conceptualize, reflect on and improve one's own performance, manage oneself, create, innovate, criticize, learn new things at all times. Well, if that's the list of expectations, we have to evolve teaching in some very important ways. 20th century teaching, as we've thought about it in some societies, cannot really meet 21st century demands. Now, some of you may recognize this teacher, and if you don't, I'll tell you that there's a movie in the United States called Ferris Bueller's Day Off. This is Ferris Bueller's high school history teacher. And I use him as an example of what was once in many societies considered adequate teaching that is no longer going to be adequate to our needs.
30, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
And so did the kids. So Ferris Bueller's high school history teacher actually has the attributes that many people have thought were essential to teaching. He knows a lot, and he can say it so the kids will hear it. I mean, that's what a conception of teaching often has been, just knowing a lot and saying it out loud. Clearly, we know more now about why that doesn't produce learning in all cases, that teaching is not talking and learning is not listening. And with the demands that we now have, that kind of teaching is not going to be adequate for what we expect students to develop in the way of skills. So schools are also beginning to change around the world, but there are different strategies for reform, and the way that they're changing is variable. Will schools begin to illustrate and support more inquiry and investigation and the kind of hands-on learning that allows students to become independent in their learning, or will they go back to the future, or in the future go back to this kind of studying for rote tests and curriculum that has been the case in a number of places, and in some societies now is definitely wrestling with a more inquiry-oriented curriculum for the policy strategy of the future. What we're clear about, I think, as we see how jobs are evolving, is that 21st century learning requires more ability to apply what you've learned in school to complex real-world tasks, to transfer knowledge and skills to new situations, as opposed to having inert knowledge that is in your brain that you've learned but may not be able to call up and apply, to communicate and collaborate and learn to learn. And in a way, that's what you would see in the typical kindergarten, where some people say everything I needed to learn I learned in kindergarten, and that human beings are wired for learning, wired to communicate, to collaborate, to use knowledge and apply it to new situations and so on. How do we maintain that throughout the years of schooling and then bring discipline to it, bring rigor to it, bring the kind of content that is necessary but keep that approach? Well, that's actually a challenge. There's a debate going on in the world about whether you can allow kindergartners to engage in that kind of open learning, or, as you see in this newspaper article from the United States, make sure that kindergartners are learning in academic ways as pressure to achieve grows. And you see these students by themselves at their desks copying letters from the board. Now that's an interesting question, a dilemma that a lot of societies are taking up. How early should we begin to get students engaged in formal discipline academics? There was a set of studies years ago in Germany when there was a debate about kindergarten as a place of play and inquiring learning versus academic kindergarten. And they had two sets of 50 schools, one of whom pursued play kindergarten and the other pursued academic kindergarten, and they followed the students from that age all the way through about the age of 9. And they found out at the end of that period of time that the students in play kindergartens, contrary to expectations, actually had higher achievement in each of the subject areas of the curriculum, as well as industry, self-responsibility, and engagement and attachment to school than the students who'd been in academic kindergartens early. So I mention that to say that this is not a straightforward question that has the obvious answers, that we'll have to think hard about this question of how to build inquiry into the curriculum and pursue academics in ways that are not always going to be obvious in their solutions. Creating independent learners in many cases means transforming teaching. And I know that in many schools here in Iceland, project-based learning is common. There is a lot of work around this question of developing independent learners. This is an example from the United States. It's from a school in Palo Alto near Stanford University. That's a very diverse school where there are 550 kids. That's probably bigger than a typical school here, but that's a portion of this large high school that are involved in a journalism class in which the students now run the class for the most part with the teacher's assistance. And I just want to give you a little peek at the way in which this award-winning classroom operates. And I have to come out of this and call up my video.
Is or there are, those two words, that is super boring. And people are just like not going to read any further. So you have to make interesting reads.
We're just going to follow up on our WikiLeaks thing by getting small groups and then discussing whether or not we would publish information under certain circumstances. So we're just going to basically do the first part. You don't have to worry about the second and third part.
I feel the same way about WikiLeaks, that we should only publish information if it actually has some kind of meaning. It's not our job to look at the future. We report news.
Exactly, we report. It's not our job to scream what's worth.
No, we report news. We do
not.
Guys,
I'm playing devil's advocate.
Kind of respected your ideas about not writing about what you found in the files, but the fact that you could access the stuff is an issue. The fact that a student was able to, it's a possible story.
For me as an advisor versus a teacher, when I'm a teacher, I'm used to standing there and lecturing, right? And I tell you to get out 2 colors of highlighters and a pen and to do it this way. I test you on what I've decided you need to know. You regurgitate to me or interpret for me as a teacher what I want. I drive the content. You consume the content. I mean, obviously it's student-directed and a whole lot of other good teacher stuff, but it looks like a teacher model. When I walk into Viking, I often park my butt in my chair over there, and I watch my editors run things.
How train is downtown, and I don't know, they made Elizabeth. Into this really cool wilderness thing for the
The NFL is currently going through a lockout.
Hi, I'm Rachel Mavis, and I'm an editor of the Campili. Before I went into Campili, I guess I just thought of it as you're just going to be writing a ton of stories, reviews, and maybe some news stories. You basically that's basically all I'm going to be doing on Campy. And then when I actually got on, I realized that a huge part of it is actually just putting the paper together. It's working on the page and really making a product and working together with the staff.
That's just a little glimpse. I like to use little clips of teaching because we all have different ideas about what we're talking about when we use the abstract terms about education. But it's an example of the kind of education where students are being explicitly taught to be independent. In this case, the writing skills and reading skills of kids in this classroom skyrocket in terms of achievement. When they go to college, they attribute much of their success in college to the skills they learned in this particular set of courses. And yet they're not the traditional formal courses that this very fine high school prides itself in offering. They're the ones in which they took more agency, more responsibility, learned how to write and revise and revise and revise for an audience and manage things on their own. So imagining how to create schools in which more and more of the opportunity for students enables them to become independent in their learning is part of the challenge of 21st century teaching. Not every educational experience ought to operate that way, but how students get enough of those experiences to be able to learn is part of the challenge. So we know something from research about teaching. There have been now 5 or 6 decades of serious inquiry into the kinds of teaching that produce stronger learning. In the United States, we're very enamored of studying things through what are called value-added methods, looking at the gains in student learning attributed to various experiences they've had. And much of that work gives us a picture of what we ought to be striving for in preparing teachers. Effective teachers engage students in active learning. In fact, we know that we all, as human beings, remember information more and are able to use it more widely if we've applied it, rather than just hearing it and remembering it for a short period. They create intellectually ambitious tasks that are like the ways in which we will use knowledge outside of school. They use a variety of teaching strategies, and they know which strategies to use for which purposes, for which children to achieve which goals. That is, it's a very judgmental, diagnostic process that teachers must engage in. They don't just get a bag of tricks that they use over and over again. They actually have a a reasoning process that can go with the choice of those strategies. They assess student learning not just for a grade, but continuously and for the purpose of adapting the teaching to student needs and also enabling students to get the kind of feedback that allows them to learn more independently. They create these effective scaffolds and supports for learning. They provide clear standards, constant feedback, and opportunities for revising work. This is becoming more and more important in our understanding of learning. From research that's been done all over the globe, some of you probably know the work of Paul Black and Dylan William, John Hattie, who've looked at this process of formative feedback, and they've found that one of the greatest increases, sources of increase in student achievement comes when students get feedback about their work, not in the form of grades, but in the form of comments about what was done well and what needs to be improved, and they have the immediate opportunity to apply those comments in revising that work. That actually means conceptualizing curriculum somewhat differently. It's not just getting through a unit, giving a test, giving a grade, and moving on to the next one, but creating a process in which that recursive revision and feedback can occur regularly. And of course, effective teachers develop and effectively manage a collaborative classroom. We all probably have, maybe not here in Iceland, but in the United States, everyone has had both good and bad experiences with group work. You'll often get people saying, oh yeah, group work, that's where one person does all the work and the other people get, to go along for the ride, or they talk about the struggles they've had in trying to work collaboratively, whether in basic education or in the university. Great teachers know how to organize collaborative work so that it is productive and that it can be a source of learning. So how can we support effective teaching for all students? We all know great teachers who are extraordinarily knowledgeable and talented and create magic. I've had conversations with many people here who've said the same thing that we hear in the United States. I went into teaching because of Mr. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so, who was a great teacher, and I wanted to become like that teacher. That's a wonderful thing. The challenge for society is how that level of teaching can become common across all classrooms. Well, I'm going to talk about what a variety of countries do in that regard. I know everybody these days pays attention to Pisa results. I want to start this by saying, first of all, if we are clear about the fact that Pisa doesn't measure everything. I remember Albert Einstein's saying that everything that counts can't be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. And so it is what it is. It's not everything, and there are all kinds of widgets and various disclaimers that one needs to use in thinking about these national rankings that are becoming so prominent. But it is interesting that of these nations that are currently scoring particularly well on PISA, Korea, Finland, and Singapore are generally at the top of the lists, and all of them had low-performing and inequitable school systems about 30 years ago. So there's something that went on in some places that actually made a big difference in what happened. And a number of common threads across a number of countries. And you'll recognize many of them as being prevalent here in Iceland as well. Iceland does very well in PISA, above the OECD averages, and has an equitable distribution of achievement. One of the key things is societal supports for children's welfare. In high-performing countries, children come to school housed, clothed, fed, and with health care. They're in school to learn, not to have all of those other things treated. Equitable spending on schools, equitable resources with typically greater investments in high-need schools and students. Substantial investments in initial teacher education and ongoing support, and I'm going to come back to that. How do we prepare teachers in nations that have had these kinds of strong improvements? schools designed to support teacher and student learning, teacher learning as well as student learning, and I'll come back to that. Equitable access to a rich thinking curriculum. In the 3 places that I mentioned that had the steep increase, one of the key things that happened over that period of time was the elimination of most tracking. The elimination of systems that had used in Finland and Singapore and Korea. They had 30 years ago lots and lots of testing, which was the basis for tracking students into very different curriculum opportunities and for going ahead to different curriculum options. And that has been almost completely eliminated in those places. So more students having common access to a rich curriculum organized around higher order thinking and performance skills, using performance assessments that are focused on those same higher order skills. But if you look across the world, there are very big differences in reform approaches, and I want to flag just a few of them. You can see them in different countries. With respect to teachers and teaching, do policies develop and share expertise, or do they foster isolation, high turnover, and remote control of teaching? Very strong management through regulation of teaching. With respect to standards, curriculum, and assessment, do standards and curriculum emphasize these higher order thinking skills, or do they tend to emphasize memorization of content? Do assessments ask students to apply knowledge to new situations or to answer rote questions? Do teachers design and evaluate assessments such that they have a deep understanding and investment in the nature of the standards and assessment system? With respect to accountability and improvement, are assessment results used primarily to improve teaching and learning or to rank and punish schools and teachers? And you'll see that kind of approach in places like England with the league tables, where those have recently spread to Australia, and in the United States under the No Child Left Behind bill. Do policies foster competition or collaboration among schools? And I would say with respect to the highest achieving nations that we see a strong emphasis on policies that deepen expertise and share it, that aim at higher order skills, and that use assessment primarily to improve education. These kinds of strategies, which are being contended in countries around the world, come from different theories of change. In the business schools and community, there's a discourse about theory X and theory Y. In theory X, managers and governments believe that the key problem is motivation, that people will respond only to rewards and sanctions, to carrots and sticks, and so incentives become the major element of reform. In theory Y, the key problem is viewed as learning. The notion is that people want to be competent, they respond to information about how to succeed in doing their work, and then investments in knowledge and capacity are the major elements of reform strategies. And you see a strong commitment to that approach in professional learning opportunities in high-achieving nations. In those places like Finland, Singapore, Korea, Canada, Japan, they ensure and subsidize extensive initial preparation for teachers, 4 or 5 years across those countries, completely at government expense, with a stipend or a salary while teachers train. So that you see in, if you went to Singapore, for example, that teachers, while they're in their 4-year training program, are earning a salary of $30,000 to $50,000 a year while they train. In Finland, the stipend is a little more modest, but there is a strong investment in being sure that people can come into a career that pays them adequately, a reasonable amount in places like Finland, a very large amount in places like Singapore, but in either case that investment in the training so that everyone comes in with a high and equitable level of preparation. And in Finland, where they attribute most of their reforms to the teacher education system, part of that is also the kind of preparation that exists. a 2-year master's on top of the 3-year entry that includes at least a full year in a model school attached to the university where you learn to practice from extraordinary mentor teachers who have to be hired into that school, especially because of their expertise at teaching, a curriculum that's focused on the pedagogy of teaching specific content areas, and the teaching of students with special needs, on the theory that if you can teach those who struggle to learn, you'll be able to teach anyone, and that has paid off for them. The rigor of writing a thesis, a master's thesis, as part of that takes up a problem of teaching practice, investigates it thoroughly as any researcher would do, and diagnoses what kind of teaching strategies would be needed to address that. Beginners are provided with intensive mentoring that's built in and funded in the schools, and teachers have between 15 and 25 hours a week built into their school schedule for planning and collaboration with one another, plus time for professional learning, lesson study, which teachers do in groups, action research about problems of practice, peer observation and coaching to evaluate and improve practice. So when we have a commitment to teaching as a clinical profession, teachers become extremely sophisticated in their understanding of how students learn and very collaborative and collective in the kind of curriculum they offer. What happens when policy ignores learning? I'm an old English teacher, so I like English teacher cartoons. This one says, "No child left behind. Today you're going to learn the meaning of irony." And I know these are not mistakes that Iceland would make, but I do want to share. Some wise person said that a wise man learns from his mistakes and a wiser man learns from the mistakes of others. So as you are undertaking policies here, here are a few object lessons. We've had 10 years of a law called No Child Left Behind. Some people now call it No Child's Behind Left. It has noble goals to raise achievement for all students across groups, but it's had very negative unintended effects. The strategy was to create test-based targets and sanctions. There was a demand for teachers to be highly qualified, but incentives, in fact, for teachers to reduce their preparation for pedagogy. There's a demand for higher achievement, but incentives for narrowing the curriculum to very limited tests, excluding low-scoring students from schools so the scores would go up by getting rid of the students who don't do well, and big disincentives for teachers to teach in high-need schools that were labeled as failing. We've learned that what doesn't work is pathways that reduce pedagogical preparation for teaching. This is just a study of alternative routes, and you can see that on the two left-hand bars, teachers coming in without full preparation to teach, who are trying to learn on the job, actually reduced student achievement from fall to spring over the course of their tenure, while those who had stronger preparation were increasing student achievement. We've tried merit pay, the idea that teachers will work harder if you pay them for their test scores. We now have 2 experiments, one in Nashville and one in New York City, that found that that had no effect on improving achievement, and one in Portugal that found that in the part of the country that paid teachers for scores, exam results went down instead of up. So in fact, teachers, and the theory is that because teachers weren't collaborating, because it became competitive, the overall quality of learning went down. And we have a lot of evidence that in fact collaboration among teachers drives achievement much further and faster than the efforts of individual teachers alone. We've seen the effects of standardized testing, the use of multiple choice tests, which just ask you to pick 1 out of 5 answers, and then that drives the curriculum. And as a teacher in Texas put it, I've seen more students who can pass the test but cannot apply the skills to anything if it's not in the test format. I have students who can do the test but can't look up words in a dictionary and understand the different meanings. As for higher quality teaching, I'm not sure I'd call it that. Because of the pressure for passing scores, more and more time is spent practicing the test and putting everything in the test format. And in these days where everyone is worried about Pisa scores and other kinds of assessments, it's very important that the nature of assessment represent integrated, challenging learning that is focused on applications and problem solving, because what you test will drive what you do and what you get. So it's one of our lessons to others. The idea of ranking schools, which is commonplace not too far southeast of here in England as well as across the Atlantic in the U.S., is that average scores drive rewards and punishments. Here are two schools, very tiny schools, with a few students. The average score went from 70 to 72. The percent meeting the standard went from 66% to 80%. The question is, should we give them rewards or should we give them sanctions? And I'm going to ask you, what would you recommend for these two schools? Take a look at the data and tell me what you think. Who will venture a guess? Well, this is called wait time, for those of you who are. Someone knows. Exactly, where was Raoul? So in fact, in the U.S. system and in the British system, these schools would get rewards because their average went up and the percent meeting the standard went up. But in fact, what happened is every score went down. Every kid learned less than the year before, but Raoul disappeared. And that's happening on a large scale in schools in the United States. Tens of thousands of students are being pushed out of school, dropping out, because when that low score disappears, the results look better. So we have to be very careful with the accountability proposals that are often sweeping the globe, that they actually drive better education and more education for more students, rather than fooling ourselves into thinking that simply getting high scores for a few means better education for all. We found that student selection provides the greatest leverage in the accountability game. Schools then try to add some likely students, drop some unlikely students, and hold on to those in the middle. So that's what not to do. What policies can we look to support teacher and school learning to meet the kind of challenges we now face? Well, one thing we know is that certain teacher characteristics matter a great deal for student learning and student achievement, and our policies should strengthen and equalize these features. We have some very large-scale studies in the U.S. showing that student learning gains, when you control for various student characteristics, are related to teachers having a strong academic background, being highly able college students who've gotten a good academic training in their content areas, that they've had quality preparation before they enter, pedagogical preparation before they enter, rather than coming in and trying to pick up teaching techniques on the job, that they are certified in the field that they're teaching, that is, they're teaching what they know well, that they are more experienced, and that they have the skills measured by an assessment that is used in the U.S. called National Board Certification, which looks at teachers through videotapes and commentaries about their teaching in terms of whether they can, in fact, engage all learners productively in disciplinary learning. Together, these skills, these characteristics predict more of the difference in student learning gains than race and parent education combined, which in the United States is a hugely divergent set of characteristics that usually leads to very big and inequitable outcomes. So we can look to strengthening those aspects of what teachers can bring with them to the classroom. But we also need to think about what can support them in the classroom. And we found that professional teaching standards like those of the National Board, guiding evaluation and development, do enable teachers to learn and become more effective. Having strong clinical preparation in their pre-service programs that allow them to learn to teach under the guidance of expert teachers who model good practices, having sustained professional development that is in a collaborative context, and having means by which career ladders allow them to spread their expertise to other teachers. We've looked at preparation programs that produce teachers who have stronger influence, whose students have stronger gains in learning. And we found that key factors include that quality of the student teaching experience, courses in content pedagogy, learning how to teach mathematics specifically and specific topics in mathematics, learning how to teach effectively in history, in science, and being able to use specific techniques. Focus in the education courses on learning specific practices that are immediately applied in a clinical experience. In fact, we have a lot of programs that now have a full year of student teaching while courses are also being taken and they interact with one another. Studying deeply curriculum and assessment and knowing how to modify it and apply it. Having performance assessments that tie theory to practice, where teachers have to demonstrate in a performance context what they can do, and having evaluation and reflection tied to that. And we know that professional development opportunities that impact practice have certain features. Now, I don't know whether you have this here in Iceland, but in the United States, what we call the drive-by, pray and pray, spray and pray, hit and run workshop is the predominant mode of professional development. Teachers are brought together and told some things and then sent back to work. And we've got some studies now that show that that has almost zero impact on student learning or teacher practice. But professional development that is on average about 50 hours in length on a specific topic, where teachers are able to focus on learning how to teach content to students, where they do that in a community of learners with other teachers, where they take these practices and try them out and come back together and reflect on what worked and what didn't work, where they integrate that into the school environment, have very large effects on teaching practice and student achievement. So one of the things that I think is key is figuring out how to enable teachers to learn about practice in practice by taking advantage of the expertise of great teachers and making it accessible. This is a little clip from New York City. This is a district that is very diverse, about 140 languages spoken by students in the district, that had a very rapid rise to one of the highest performing districts in that city and state, and where they really looked for a variety of strategies to help teachers learn about practice in practice. You'll see here a teacher working with a student about how to read, and another teacher is sitting off to the side who is learning from her, and you'll see that exchange. I hope.
And you studied that. What did you notice that made you fix your work? You fixed it. You said, I can, and then I saw you go back and you said, I
can't.
Can't. How did you know that was the word can't? Oh, so you did what good readers do. You checked the ending.
And we've come to some conclusions. We've come to conclusions that, time is an element, and we need to allow for that. Rigorous instruction.
When she gets totally stuck and she looks at you and you're not supposed to say anything?
No, when she looks at me, that's a strategy. I usually pick one teaching point from here that I think is the most strategic, that will carry into
being able to assess the learner, being able to know exactly what a child can do.
Every time she fixes her work, I write SC for self-correct.
And knowing what that means in terms of that child's instruction. And then being able to take that to the next level.
Like over here, she said can, and then instead of just fixing her work, she went back and she said, I can.
And that's what professional development is about. We tap into the expertise of people who can support that.
And if we were to be able to take some time to look at the other strategies in use, you'd see some really creative options for teachers to experience expertise in practice. For example, resident teachers who are enabled to take teachers into their classroom for 2 or 3 weeks, experienced teachers who learn a set of practices from someone who is truly expert, while a substitute teacher who is an expert retired teacher comes in and actually teaches the children the same practices in literacy or mathematics or whatever it is. Then when that teacher in training comes back to the classroom, she gets coaching from the teacher she's spent time with in that resident program. A variety of ways to try to figure out how to bring, all of this, by the way, is supported by a university in New York City, New York University, that helps support the training of the mentors, helps support the process of the coaching, and trains its own teachers in those methods. So we can also support teaching with other policies that help to support student achievement. We know that student achievement increases where teachers work in teams to plan and improve teaching with one another, and we can support that with policy that provides that time. We know that student achievement increases where teachers have long-term relationships with students, something that is not new to you, but is new in the United States. And having that teacher stay with the same student for 2 or 3 years makes a huge impact on student learning, particularly in the elementary grades. Teachers, when they're engaged in authentic pedagogy that supports active learning in real-world contexts, like the one that we saw in the Palo Alto classroom. And schools that use performance assessments to guide student work and inform teaching. So what do I mean by performance assessment? This is the last point I want to make, but it's certainly something that is driving reform in a lot of countries. I don't mean the typical U.S. Test item, which you see here, which 2 gases make up most of the Earth's atmosphere, A, B, C, D. You can guess your way to 25% of the answers. This is an American icon. Is a hamburger an example of stored energy? Explain why or why not. It's a 1-sentence response, yes or no. Here, on the other hand, is a school-based science assessment in Singapore that students will undertake in every science course that they take. It is scored in a moderated fashion by teachers as part of the exam system, and there students need to identify a problem, design an experiment, conduct it, write it up, and the result looks like the write-up for a typical science journal article. And that, done often enough, really prepares students in a different way and has teachers focus their efforts in a way that will result in the kind of learning that they're hoping for. The goal there is assessment of, as, and for learning, and that's a tremendous support for teaching. So at the end of the day, what I think are learning is that we have to think in terms of learning systems. At the school level, we need to find ways to support collaboration and reflection among teachers and students so that there's that continual learning process. We need to provide as much access as possible to not only a high-quality curriculum, but an active high-quality curriculum. But we also, in these days, need to enable students to pursue their passions and develop their talents. And so while a common curriculum is important, it's also important, particularly as students get older, to allow them to go deeply into the areas where they will personally excel. At the system level, we need to think about how to support collaboration and reflection among schools and school leaders. In Ontario, Canada, a major part of their reform was creating networks among schools, creating opportunities for schools to share their practices and research, supporting successful schools and disseminating their work to those in other schools, creating networks of principals and other leaders, and supporting that shared learning from practice. And then we need to enable the schools to share research and successful practices while still developing new knowledge. I want to close with the notion that a goal for 21st century nations is to get beyond the old sayings that many of us have probably heard, those who can do and those who can't teach being one of the worst of those. We need to be understanding that in a world in which learning determines the fate of individuals and societies, powerful teaching is the key path to that, so that we want those who can to do and those who understand to teach. And furthermore, we want those who can to teach and those who can't to go into a less significant line of work. Thank you.